The city of Seoul hummed with a life that Kang Hana felt utterly disconnected from. Her days were a monotonous loop. Wake up in her small, sun-starved Goshiwon room, ride the crowded subway to a bustling chain coffee shop, and spend 8 hours forcing smiles while serving bland lattes to people whose lives seemed infinitely more vibrant than her own. Loneliness wasn't an emotion for Hana, it was the architecture of her existence. She was an island, her shores worn smooth by a quiet resignation. She had no family to speak of, just a vague, faded memory of parents lost long ago and an upbringing shuffled between indifferent relatives. At 26, her life was a cup of lukewarm water, tasteless and unfulfilling. Then the letter arrived. It was old, the paper thick and yellowed, bearing the seal of a law firm she'd never heard of. It spoke of a great aunt, a woman whose name she barely recognized, who had passed away and left Hana her sole inheritance, a property. The property wasn't a stuffy apartment or a plot of land. It was a cafe, tucked away in a quiet, forgotten alley in the old district of Ikseondang. Café Dalbit, Café Lunar, was a relic from another time. It was a small 2-story wooden building with a crescent moon sign hanging crookedly over the door. Dust motes danced like fairies in the slivers of light piercing the grimy windows. Inside, it smelled of old wood, dried herbs, and something else, something intangible, like stored-up silence and forgotten time. The furniture was a collection of mismatched antique pieces, and the shelves were lined not with modern syrups, but with glass jars filled with strange, unlabeled ingredients, shimmering dust, dried flowers she couldn't name, and stones that seemed to hum with a low energy. A handwritten note on the counter read, "We open when the moon is high and close when the sun greets the sky. We serve what the soul needs, not what the tongue desires." It was absurd.
Driven by a flicker of curiosity that had long been dormant, and with nothing left to lose, Hana decided to honor the bizarre instructions for one night. After cleaning away the thickest layers of dust and figuring out the ancient, temperamental espresso machine, she flipped the closed sign to open just as the clock struck midnight. The alley outside was silent, bathed in the cool glow of the streetlights. She expected no one. For an hour, she sat alone, the low hum of the refrigerator her only companion. Then, the bell above the door chimed. A delicate, crystalline sound. A woman with weary eyes and slumped shoulders entered. She didn't look at a menu. "I'd like a cup of forgotten courage, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. Hana froze. It had to be a joke, a prank. But the woman's sorrow was so palpable, so raw, that Hana found herself nodding. She didn't know what to do. Instinct took over. Her eyes fell on a jar of shimmering golden powder. Without thinking, she added a tiny pinch to the espresso grounds. As she frothed the milk, she focused on the woman's despair, on the feeling of being too scared to take a necessary step. She poured the latte, her hands moving with an unfamiliar grace, and topped it with a sprinkle of dried lavender. The woman took a sip, her eyes closing. A moment passed. When she opened them again, the deep-seated fear had been replaced by a quiet resolve. "Thank you," she said, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. She paid with a few crumpled bills and left, her posture straighter, her steps more certain. Hana stared at the empty cup, her heart hammering. It was impossible. It had to be a coincidence. But then another customer came in, and another. An old man who ordered an ounce of what could have been. A young student who asked for a shot of clarity.
Each time, Hana found herself drawn to a different jar, her hands moving as if guided by the cafe's own strange magic, mixing concoctions that addressed the soul's ailments. She was a pharmacist for broken hearts, a bartender for weary spirits. Near 3 a.m., he walked in,
Lee Do-joon. He was different from the others. While they wore their sadness like a heavy coat, his was a subtle, pervasive chill that seemed to emanate from deep within him. He was handsome in a quiet, understated way, with kind eyes that held an ocean of unexplainable melancholy. He didn't order anything strange. "Just a warm Americano, please," he said, his voice soft and low. He took the cup and sat at a small table by the window, not looking at his phone, not reading a book, just staring out into the empty alley. He became her first regular. Every night, he would come in, order the same drink, and sit in the same spot for hours. The initial silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was a shared quiet, a mutual understanding of loneliness. Hana would polish the old wooden counter, organize the mysterious jars, and steal glances at him. She noticed the small things, the way he'd trace the rim of his cup, the slight furrow in his brow that never seemed to disappear even when he slept for a few moments, his head resting against the cool glass of the window. His presence was a steady, calming anchor in the bizarre, magical whirlwind her life had suddenly become. She found herself looking forward to the sound of the bell that announced his arrival. Slowly, tentatively, they began to talk. It started with simple things. "It might rain tomorrow," he'd say. "The coffee is good tonight," she'd reply. Their conversations were like building a fragile bridge, plank by plank, across a vast canyon of solitude.
He told her he was a landscape architect, but he hadn't designed anything in over a year. He spoke of a profound emptiness, a feeling of being untethered, as if a vital part of his memory, his very identity, had been surgically removed, leaving behind only phantom pains. "I have dreams," he confessed one night, his voice barely a whisper, "of a woman's silhouette against a stormy sky. I can hear her laugh, I can smell the rain on her coat, but I can't see her face. I feel like I loved her more than life itself, but I can't remember her name." His vulnerability was a magnet, pulling at a part of Hana's heart she didn't know existed. She felt a desperate urge to help him, to brew him a coffee that would return what he had lost. But the thought terrified her. The other customers' sorrows were simple, contained. His felt like a bottomless abyss, and she was afraid of what she might find if she looked too closely. For now, she was content to simply exist in the strange nocturnal world she had inherited. Café Dalbit became her sanctuary. The quiet hum of the night, the scent of coffee and magic, the parade of sad souls seeking solace, and the steady, melancholic presence of Lee Do-joon. It was a life that was still lonely, but it was a loneliness that was shared, a loneliness that had purpose. She was no longer just Kang Hana, the invisible girl. She was the master of Café Dalbit, a place where memories could be remade. For the first time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. She was establishing a new normal, a baseline of quiet magic and budding connection, unaware that the foundation of this new reality was far more fragile and mysterious than she could ever imagine. The key, the introduction, was complete. The stage was set, the players in their places, their ordinary world teetering on the edge of the extraordinary.
The rhythm of Café Dalbit settled into a strange, magical routine. Hana grew more confident in her newfound abilities, her initial fear giving way to a quiet sense of purpose. She learned to read the subtle language of her customer souls, to see the specific shade of their sorrow. For a young musician plagued by stage fright, she brewed a tea with a single, petrified wildflower, transforming his anxiety not into arrogance, but into a calm focus. For a writer with a crippling case of writer's block, she mixed a dark roast with a pinch of what looked like crushed obsidian, helping him not to find a new story, but to rediscover the passion for the one he had given up on. She was a sculptor of memories, chipping away the painful edges and polishing the core of the experience until it became a source of strength rather than shame. She never erased the past entirely. That felt wrong, a violation. Instead, she reframed it, changing the emotional filter through which it was viewed. Her relationship with Do-joon deepened with each passing night. The fragile bridge of their initial conversations was now a well-trodden path. He began to smile more, a sad, gentle curve of his lips that made Hana's chest ache with affection. He started bringing her things, a small, perfectly formed pebble from a riverbed, a fallen maple leaf of the most brilliant crimson. He told her they reminded him of her, of the quiet, natural beauty of the cafe. He opened up more about the void inside him, the ghost of a love that haunted his every waking moment. "It feels like a missing limb," he explained one rainy night, the sound of drops tapping against the window pane filling the silence. "I know it was there. I know it was essential, but I can't remember what it was like to have it." Hana's feelings for him grew from a tentative sprout into a flourishing vine, wrapping themselves around her heart.
She yearned to help him, the desire becoming a constant, low hum in her mind. The thought of brewing him a coffee to soothe his specific pain was intoxicating, but she hesitated. His sorrow was so vast and deeply intertwined with his identity. What would happen if she tampered with something so fundamental? The cafe's magic felt intuitive, not scientific. There was no instruction manual, no guide to its limits or its consequences. One night, a haggard-looking man stumbled in, reeking of soju. He was a former investor, he slurred, who had lost his family's fortune on a single bad decision. He begged her for a drink that would make him forget the last year entirely. "I just want it gone," he cried, his face buried in his hands. Hana felt a surge of pity. This was the biggest manipulation she had ever considered. She chose a dark, earthy root from a jar and ground it into a fine powder, her hands trembling slightly. She focused all her energy on his plea, on the desire for complete erasure. She served him the drink, a thick, dark concoction that smelled of damp earth. He drank it greedily. His eyes went blank for a moment, then refocused, clear and confused. Where am I?" he asked, looking around the cafe as if seeing it for the first time. He had no memory of why he was there, of the fortune he had lost, or the despair that had driven him to her door. He simply got up, mumbled an apology for intruding, and left. The blankness in his eyes chilled Hana to the bone. She had succeeded, but it felt like a hollow victory. A moment later, a sharp, stabbing pain shot through her temple. She squeezed her eyes shut, leaning against the counter for support. When the pain subsided, she felt off. She glanced at the photo she kept by the register, a faded picture of her 5-year-old self. She was holding a fluffy white puppy. She blinked. What was his name? The dog's name had been Bomi. She had loved that dog more than anything. She could remember the feeling of its fur, the sound of its happy yaps, but the name itself was gone, a clean hole punched through the fabric of her memory. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Was this the price? A memory for a memory? Her own past, a currency for mending others? The realization was a cold stone in her stomach. She looked at the jars on the shelves, their contents shimmering under the dim lights. They weren't just ingredients, they were vials of potential sacrifice. Her own life, her own history was the source of this magic. The development, the sung, had taken a sharp turn. The slice of life with a magical twist now had stakes. Her power wasn't a gift, it was a transaction, and the cost was terrifyingly personal. The incident left her shaken. She became more cautious, turning away customers whose requests were too drastic. She tried to warn them that forgetting isn't the same as healing, but they rarely listened. Meanwhile, her feelings for Do-joon became impossible to ignore. He started helping her around the cafe, staying until sunrise to help her clean up. He'd tell her about the trees and flowers he wanted to plant, his eyes lighting up with a passion she had never seen in him before. It was during one of these quiet, pre-dawn moments that he reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Hana," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I know I'm a mess. I'm a man chasing a ghost. But when I'm here, with you, the ghost is quieter. I feel present." His thumb stroked the back of her hand, sending a jolt of warmth through her. It was a confession, not of love, but of something just as profound, of connection, of finding a moment of peace in a storm.
Her heart swelled. She wanted to be that peace for him. She wanted to see his brow unfurrow permanently, to see his sad eyes fill with genuine joy. The fear of using her power on him warred with the desperate, aching need to heal him. She knew the risk now. To mend a memory as deep and traumatic as his, what would she have to give up? A cherished birthday? The face of a childhood friend? Her own name? The dilemma was a constant, sharp presence. The cafe, once a sanctuary, now felt like a place of temptation. Its magic a siren song promising to give him everything, while threatening to take everything from her. The stage of development was complete. The characters and their relationships had deepened. The rules of the magic had been established, and the shadow of the coming conflict loomed large, waiting for the one choice that would change everything. The rainy season arrived, draping Seoul in a perpetual sheet of gray. The sound of water drumming against the roof of Café Dalbit became the nightly soundtrack to their lives. The rain seemed to agitate Do-joon's phantom grief, bringing his turmoil to a head. He would sit by the window for hours, his knuckles white as he gripped his coffee cup, his gaze lost in the rivulets of water racing down the glass. The dreams became more intense, more vivid. He started sketching them on napkins, the twisted metal of a guardrail, the pattern of a shattered windshield, the silhouette of a lone figure standing by a roadside. One night, he arrived at the cafe drenched and trembling, his face pale with a terror that was bone deep. "It wasn't just a dream," he stammered, his body shaking uncontrollably. "It was a memory, a car crash. I was there, the smell of rain and gasoline, and her. She was with me. I can almost hear her calling my name."
He looked at Hana, his eyes pleading, desperate. "Hana, I'm losing my mind. This emptiness is going to swallow me whole. I need to know. I need to remember what happened. I need to remember her." Seeing him so broken, so utterly consumed by this gaping wound in his past, shattered Hana's resolve. Her fear of the consequences, the cost to her own memories, seemed selfish and small in the face of his suffering. What was her past compared to his sanity? What was the name of a childhood pet compared to the name of the woman he loved? In that moment, her love for him eclipsed everything else. She made a decision. She would not just soothe his pain or reframe his grief. She would do what she had never dared to do before. She would bring the memory back, whole and unfiltered. She would give him back his past, no matter the price. "I can help you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Drink this and focus. Focus on the rain, on the silhouette, on the feeling of her hand in yours. Don't be afraid. I'll be right here." This time, she didn't choose a single ingredient. She moved through the cafe like a woman in a trance, a pinch of shimmering dust from one jar, a single perfectly preserved teardrop-shaped petal from another, a sliver of stone that pulsed with a faint, warm light. She was pouring everything she had into this, not just the cafe's magic, but her own will, her own love for him. She ground the ingredients with the mortar and pestle, the rhythmic sound echoing the frantic beat of her own heart. She brewed the coffee, a dark, fragrant elixir that seemed to absorb the dim light of the room. When she placed the cup in his hands, she knew there was no turning back. This was the turning point, the Jaeon. He drank, The moment the liquid touched his lips, the atmosphere in the cafe shifted. The air grew heavy, crackling with a strange energy. Do-joon's eyes widened, then squeezed shut as a torrent of images flooded his mind. He saw it all. Laughter in a car speeding down a wet highway, a sudden, blinding flash of headlights, the horrifying screech of tires, the violent, gut-wrenching impact of metal on metal. And her. He saw her face, clear as day. Her name echoed in the silent chambers of his mind, a name he hadn't spoken in years. Seon. He remembered her smile, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. He remembered their plans, their fights, their future. He remembered holding her hand as the world spun into darkness, the life slowly fading from her eyes. The tragic love he had forgotten came rushing back, a tidal wave of grief and clarity. Seon, he breathed, tears streaming down his face. He looked up at Hana, his eyes filled with a universe of pain and remembrance. And then the twist, the true Jen, struck. As his memory returned, hers was violently ripped away. A blinding, white-hot pain exploded behind her eyes. It was more than a headache. It was an annihilation. The cafe spun around her, the jars on the shelves blurring into streaks of light. Her own past, her carefully constructed identity, fractured like shattering glass. A single, impossible image flashed in her mind's eye with terrifying clarity. She was in that car. She was the one looking at Do-joon, her hand in his. She was the one whose world was fading to black. She was the one who whispered his name with her final breath. The letter about the inheritance, the strange lonely life, the intuitive knowledge of the cafe's magic, it all snapped into a horrifying new context. She wasn't Kang Hana, the lonely barista who had inherited a magical cafe. That was a story, a construct, a place filler for a soul that had lost its way. She was Seon, or what was left of her.
The realization was a cosmic shockwave that recontextualized everything. The cafe wasn't just a building, it was a metaphysical waiting room, a space between life and death, created by the force of a love so strong it couldn't let go. Her power wasn't a gift, it was a fundamental law of this space. To give him back a memory of her, an equal measure of her own identity had to be sacrificed. The loneliness she had felt her whole life wasn't a personality trait. It was the literal emptiness of a being who wasn't whole, a ghost wearing a borrowed name. Do-joon stared at her, his face a mask of dawning horror and disbelief. He saw it in her eyes, the flicker of recognition, the echo of the woman he had lost. "Soyeon," he whispered, his voice trembling. But as he spoke the name, the light in her eyes flickered and died. The recognition vanished, replaced by a vast, terrifying emptiness. The connection between them snapped. The pain in her head subsided, leaving behind a chilling, profound silence. She looked at him, at the strange cafe, at her own hands with the wide, uncomprehending eyes of a stranger. Who is Soyeon? She asked, her voice small and lost. Who are you?
In the days that followed, Do-joon was faced with an impossible moral dilemma. He tried at first to force the issue. He called her Seon. He brought her old photographs, took her to places they had gone together, desperately trying to spark a flicker of recognition. But his efforts only frightened and confused her. To this new Hana, he was a stranger, insisting on a life she didn't live, a name that wasn't hers. She would retreat from him, her eyes filled with fear, clutching the name Hana like a life raft in a stormy sea. It was the only thing she had. Do-joon soon realized the profound selfishness of his actions. He wasn't trying to heal her, he was trying to resurrect his own past, to overwrite this new, innocent being with the ghost of his grief. To force her to remember would be to force her to experience the trauma of her own death, to chain her to a tragedy she had finally, through this bizarre magic, escaped. The conclusion, the gale, required him to reconcile the two disparate elements, the man who remembered everything and the woman who remembered nothing. It required a new kind of harmony. He had to let Seon go for the second time. He stopped calling her by that name. He put away the old photos. He started coming to the cafe not as a man desperate to reclaim his past, but as a customer, the same as he was in the beginning. He would order a warm Americano and sit at his table by the window. He had to re-earn her trust, to rebuild their fragile bridge from scratch. He began to tell her stories. He didn't frame them as her own lost memories, but as beautiful, tragic tales of a woman he once knew. He told her about a landscape architect and a free-spirited musician named Seon who loved the rain. He told her about their dreams and their silly arguments, painting a portrait of their love without the burden of her having to live it.
In telling her these stories, a strange thing began to happen. Hana, the blank slate, started to develop her own feelings, her own reactions. She would listen, captivated, her heart aching for the man in the story and the woman he had lost. She was falling in love not with a memory, but with the man who sat before her, a man of profound kindness and a gentle, lingering sadness. She was falling in love with Do-joon, and Do-joon, in sharing his past as a story, found a way to process his grief. He was honoring Seon's memory without imprisoning Hana within it. He was falling in love not with a ghost, but with the quiet, resilient woman who ran the magical cafe, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him without even knowing it. Their roles had reversed. Now he was the one providing comfort, and she was the one being slowly healed. One night, after he finished a story about how Seon had convinced him to design a garden full of only white flowers that would glow in the moonlight, Hana looked at him, her eyes clear and full of a deep new emotion. "She must have loved you very much," she said softly. "She was very lucky." Do-joon's heart clenched. "I was the lucky one," he replied, his voice thick. In that moment, the space between them was filled with a new understanding. It wasn't the passionate, fated love of Do-joon and Seon. It was something quieter, more deliberate, and perhaps more profound. It was the love of Do-joon and Hana, a love built not on a shared past, but on a shared, quiet present, a love born from the ashes of a tragedy. Hana never regained her memories as Seon. She remained Hana, the master of Café Delbit, a place for broken dreams.
But she was no longer lonely. Her purpose was clear. She continued to serve her melancholic clientele, but now with a deeper understanding of the sacrifices involved, a wisdom that came from an experience she couldn't remember, but could feel in the very fabric of her soul. Do-joon never stopped coming to the cafe. It was his home, their sanctuary. He started designing again, and his first project was a small, public garden in Aksandong, filled with white flowers that glowed under the moon. The final scene is on a quiet night a year later. Do-joon is sitting at his usual table. Hana brings him his Americano, but she also brings a second cup for herself. She sits down across from him, a gesture she's never made before. They don't speak. They just sit together, sipping their coffee, bathed in the soft lunar glow of the cafe. He reaches across the table and takes her hand. She smiles, a genuine, peaceful smile, and squeezes his hand back. The conclusion is not a fiery, passionate reunion, but a quiet, harmonious chord. It is a lingering moment of bittersweet acceptance, a testament to a love that was strong enough to die, and even stronger to be reborn anew.